This is the Friday Rugby Preview on Borders Rugby Radio with Stuart Cameron.
Hello and welcome to the Friday Rugby Preview, and with the 15 season pretty much over now, we're in reflective mood today, looking back at the achievements of Hawick in winning the Premiership, Kelso promoted to the Premiership after winning National 1, Langham winning East League 2, and Hawick Quins taking the East League 3 title, and also let's not forget Kelso Ladies winning the East Conference. All in all, a terrific season for Borders Rugby, and honourable mentions for some of our other teams who had some memorable moments as well. Well, with me today is not just Dale Clancy, but we've got Robin Purdie here as well. We're really stretching the budget today to 2 cans of juice, and of course we'll be previewing another double weekend of K7's action with Kelso and Earlston events on this weekend, plus looking at latest happenings from the South Camp as they prepare for their historic match against Edinburgh at Netherdale on Tuesday the 9th of May, and that's going to be kicking off at 7 o'clock. So where do we begin? Well, let's start at the top with Hawick. 1 game to go in their season, and Dale still undefeated.
Yeah, they've been the head and shoulders above every team, at that level of rugby this season, and even with the start of the Super Series, which is well underway, they've lost a couple of players to that. They've still been able to kind of maintain their continuity, their confidence in the team. It was a really solid performance away to Glasgow Hawks in the semi-final of the Cup. So, still on for the double, going well. There's obviously the distraction, a very welcome distraction, but the distraction of the South now as well. But it's the same throughout all the regions. Mar are equally as distracted by their commitments for the inter-district rugby. So, yeah, hopefully Hawick are able to get over the line and get the double.
And Robin, there was no real hint of this right at the start of the season, wasn't there? We went down to Mansfield Park, saw Selkirk nearly turn them over. It was a draw in the end, 20 points to 20, but no hint at all that we were going to see them then go through the season unbeaten.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think they strengthened in the first few weeks of the campaign. You're completely correct. There was no hint on that first day. I mean, Selkirk quite feasibly could have won that game, and then I don't think, by their own admission, they were all that convincing the following week against Jed as well. I think the real turning point potentially was the last minute conversion by Kirkford, and I think it was the third game against Accies to win that game from the jaws of defeat. Then all of a sudden they're 3 from 3, and they really kicked on from there. And like I say, they recruited exceptionally well in and around that time. Some boys came back from the Knights, strengthened them, but they really recruited well in the positions the positions that potentially needed strengthening. And of course, not long after that, one of the players of the season came in, Ethan Riley, and they just kicked on from there. To be honest, Dalton Redpath came back, Fraser Rennick was back, and they just had a different look about them from that first game against Selkirk, and they've been absolutely exemplary ever since then.
And make no mistake, this is a team and a squad that's going to go down in Hawick history for many, many years to come.
Absolutely, and here's hoping they get it over the line next weekend against Mar. Dale mentioned the semi-final, and we covered that, of course. I was really, really impressed by that day. We've spoken often in the last 2 or 3 months about what, is this going to be the banana skin? Is that going to be the banana skin? And I thought that could have been tricky. And for the first half, they hadn't played that much rugby in the weeks leading up to it, and they maybe didn't quite hit their straps in the first half. It's almost like they hit a switch midway through the second half, and they absolutely blew Glasgow Hawks away. And as Dale mentioned, they've lost a couple of boys to Super 6, and there's 2 or 3 boys unavailable, and they just continue to impress. It really has been so impressive this season, and you're right, particularly if they win next weekend, they will go down in folklore, and deservedly so.
And I think hats off to Matty Douglas as well, because I think the Super Series coming in was almost the thing that Hawick perhaps needed, because in the run-up to the final, the playoff final, there was almost an element of complacency because they were that good. It was probably difficult to keep trying to reach those levels again and again because they had the personnel. So with losing a few key players, I think Matty Douglas has done really well to, light a fire again and get that composure back into the squad. So, I think out of all the teams with the Super Series coming about, Hawick, it's probably been a blessing in disguise, actually, because, they've had to kind of reshape a few things, but the kind of the complacency, I don't think they know they can rely on those big key players now. They've got to dig a bit deeper in that squad.
And a couple of sort of big wins over Currie, 40 points at Millennium Park Plus and also at Mansfield Park. But it wasn't just the big wins, it was the fact that they knew how to win when the chips were down.
Yeah, well, the wins are great. I remember meeting the Hawick bus outside a very well-known takeaway establishment near Dalkeith. and Matty Carrier was there. He queued twice, I believe, but he was there, and they were in great fettle because of the big win that they got away at Millennium. But then the character that they showed in the final was brilliant, and I think that is it. They're undefeated for a reason. They've been in elements in games where they perhaps could have lost, or they perhaps should have lost, but they've been able to find a way. And I think their squad is a big thing in that. Robin completely alluded to it. The emergence of Ethan Riley was huge, because Grant Huggan, as much as he is a really, really good player, Ethan Riley is a really top quality operator, and he brought the best out of Kyle Brunton and Andrew Mitchell. And as soon as you had that thread in that squad, everything else seemed to work. Kirk Ford was immaculate from the boot all season, but yeah, they've had big wins. They've had testing wins as well, and I think the final will be equally as testing, because Mar, not won the cup. They'll be wanting to come back and really try and get some silverware.
I don't know what it is about not just the team but the club and almost the town. They seem to find themselves in these situations over the years. We go back to the Currie game, the final. I don't think there's any other club that I can think of that would have dug themselves out of the hole that they were in. And I go right back almost to the very first cup final. They were 15 points down after 15 minutes or whatever it was against Wadsonians, and they came back and found a way to win. Their drop goal in the final that time, when they won it 21 years ago, and the playoff game they had against Dundee at that time, they dug that out. They just seem to have something about them, and in these high profile moments they just find a way. And I don't think it's going to be any different next weekend. Can Mar beat them? Absolutely they can. Mar are a decent team, no doubt about it, but if Hawick show up, and even if the chips are down with 10 minutes to go, you just would back them to find a way out of these tricky situations that they're in.
And you mentioned that Dundee game, which happened, I think, at Megatland, wasn't it, for the playoff, back in the Stuart McCulloch days. Of course, I remember his commentary very, very well, one of the great moments, and they had 3 penalty tries that day, and it was a case of brawn against brain, and as you alluded to there, Robin, it's all about knowing how to win and overcoming what was a huge Dundee pack at the time with Alan Brown and people like that involved, but they found a way to win.
Yeah, and I don't know if, to use the old kind of cliche about, it means more when you come from a town and you're representing a badge to maybe some of the city. I don't know if I subscribe to that, but that there's something that enables them to find this way to go a bit deeper than other teams, when they're really in the trenches, they just find a way to get out of them. It's quite remarkable.
But I think if you look at even the last 15 years or so in Scottish national rugby, in the Borders, the club that have held us up, I would say, are Hawick. You think of Sutherland, Hogg, Graham.
Yeah.
Before that, in Scottish rugby, even you think of Bill McLaren and commentators. And I know Greg Laidlaw, obviously for Jed, he's been obviously retiring this week, and he's been a huge part of recent Scottish history. But Hawick have been a bit of a trailblazer, and I think I do subscribe to that for somehow, some way, some reason in that community, rugby has been ingrained in them so deeply that it is hard to replicate in clubs where they've maybe got a little bit more of a revolving door. So in Hawick, they do have that culture. Sean Muir said it after the final. He said there's no other team would be able to come back and win that final with the way that they've done it. And I find it hard to disagree. There will be teams probably would have been able to pull it for the fire, might have been luck or whatever, but it's hard to disagree with them. And that's one of your club captains, ex-club captains, playing captains, who thinks that about his squad. He believes that in every single player. So, it's something that they've got ingrained in them, and it must mean a lot more to, pull on your town's badge when you've got that, as opposed to going to a club and perhaps just pulling on a random crest and playing.
That's right. And there was that other example as well. Now I forget the context of what game it was. I think it was a cup semi-final possibly when they played Heriots at home.
Oh yes.
Was it 50 phases?
62 I think it was.
62 phases.
And Stuart McFarlane commentated on every single one of them.
Yeah, 62 phases literally camped on their own line. Did it last for however many minutes? And again, just another example of where they dig this resolve from that just tends to get them over the line in these crunch moments. It's quite something.
And Hawick didn't give away a penalty in 62 phases. Absolutely extraordinary. But let's go on to Selkirk now, because Selkirk, their away record, absolutely astonishing. Completely baffling to understand as well. They won all their games away, apart from the last 2 to Currie and Edinburgh Accies, who were also in the top 4. But they lost most of their home matches, Robin. It's a very strange season.
It was. They got off to a a flyer, and we spoke about Hoyk's recruitment. Selkirk also recruited really well last season as well, and it looked for all the world at one point that they were going to encroach into the top four, which if you'd offered them that at the start of the season, given the season had the last campaign, they surely would have bitten your hand off. But just when the injuries started to take their toll, it highlighted that again as a squad they're maybe not quite as strong as a Curry, 1 to 23 or 1 to 30 even, you go a bit deeper, or certainly Hoyk, and they just got found out a wee bit from a strength and depth point of view. But I think they can look back, and we spoke to Ross Nixon after they'd lost in the quarter-final to Ayr, quarter-final of the Cup, and he seemed pretty disappointed all in with the overall season, 5th from where they'd been. Looking back at where they'd come from, 5th in the league and with a Border League trophy in the cabinet, I think they've done really well this season.
Yeah, what about you, Dale, on that? Because the Scott White effect came into play, of course, but we even brought this up many a time to Scott, trying to get him to explain, how can you explain the fact that they were not so great at home and very good on the road, and all he could come was, well, they like the bus trips.
Yeah.
That was basically all he could come up with.
Yeah, the Selkirk team do like a social, so they perhaps can get up for that more. But I think they would be disappointed because they got themselves into a position where they could have had a really successful tilt at it, and you think, and I've said it before, in terms of a Borders Rugby side of things, could you imagine a Hoyk Selkirk semi-final in a Premiership? It would have been brilliant for us and for the region and for the spectators to take in, but they just slipped up in those two games. Musselburgh and Heriots were probably the two big games that they let slip through the net. That would have seen them through. But there's loads of things. I think the depth of the squad, it does highlight a lot of things in the Borders. Like, we're not inundated with top quality rugby players. We've got a lot of them. But I think when the top quality rugby players perhaps have to take a couple of weeks out for injury, there's issues there. A lot of the, towards the end as well, with the way that the season went, there's a lot of farming commitments in that squad as well. So you lose a lot of key personnel, like some McComb and McClymondt, who had really good seasons. They can only commit so much until work takes over. So they obviously had to deal with that. Scott White also announced, probably in hindsight, maybe the wrong time that he was leaving. Does that play into players' minds, thinking, well, he's staying, I don't have to impress them, I don't have to try harder. Maybe they took their foot off the gas a little bit. But it was a brilliant season for where they were last year. As I say, the Border League was an interesting final. It probably wasn't the top quality final we were hoping for, but it was well attended, well backed, and they managed to pick up the trophy, so I don't think they'll argue with that.
And Robin Jed Forrest rattled up the try bonuses this year, but they gave away a lot at the back as well, but comfortably mid-table. They weren't even close to being relegated, let's be honest, and a very solid induction really for Andrew Brown as head coach. Absolutely,
I think Andrew Brown's done a great job this season. We cast our minds back to the start of the season, and some of it might have been rumour mill, but there was talk that there was poor numbers at training, and obviously they couldn't attend a couple of Sevens tournaments because they had 15s warm-up games, and there was all this stuff coming out. I think, if somebody had asked me at the start of the season, who are going to get relegated, Jed very much would have been in the shake-up. And again, I think if they'd have been offered 6th place in the table at the start of the season, again, they would have surely would have bitten people's hands off. And I think, I think they've punched above their weight, Jed, this season, and I think 6th represents a really good campaign, and like I say, all credit to Andrew Brown.
And some nice new talent coming in as well. We've seen the Walker brothers doing really, really well.
Yeah, I've been in, especially in the Sevens. I think James has been a brilliant addition to that squad, and obviously you see the impact when Jed get knuckled down and concentrate on Sevens. You can see what they do. But I've said week on week, I think the impact that Andrew Brown's had at that team's been really, really good. He's obviously brought a lot of direction to them in terms of their style. Like Jed Forrest are almost a bit of a maverick team. They just love to play rugby, chuck the ball about. They're usually pretty fast and loose in terms of the way that they play. And I think Andrew Brown brought a little bit more discipline to that squad, which, that's the foundation set now for next year. And I think they were never going to be challenging for the Premiership title. So, to consolidate their position next year in the Premiership. And let's remember as well, there's another couple of big games for Borders clubs in the Premiership, which does the coffers for the clubs brilliant. It certainly helps them next year because Kelso are now in the mix. So they'll be glad they're still in that position in the Premiership, and they'll probably welcome Kelso in there as well, because there's another couple of huge battles. So, it's a platform certainly to try and jump on from next year.
Which moves us nicely on to National 1. 3 of the top 4 teams from the Borders.
Yeah, and we spoke about this before, I think last week, in terms of the quality and probably the gap between the teams that we were mentioning in terms of Peebles and Berwick. But our 3 teams that are in National 1, we're all fighting for promotion. Great to see Kelso get there. Gala and Melrose, they've had their time over the last couple of decades at the Premiership and the top level of rugby, and they've been successful. They've won cups, they've won Premiership crowns, so they've had success up there. It's nice to see another team get a little bit of a little bit of a tilt at that level of rugby. So great to see Kelso go up. Gala again, it'll be interesting to see what comes next year. I think they'll be disappointed with their campaign. Obviously, it was kind of waves and fits at the start, and then a change in personnel in terms of getting rid of Jono, and then having to have interim coaches in the meantime. But certainly I think Gala and Melrose have found themselves in a good position to have another tilt at it next year.
And staying with Kelso for the moment, they kind of went about their business with the feet on the ground. There was no kind of showboating at all. We've mentioned this before. Very professional approach to National 1.
Culture. They appear from the outside looking in to have a great culture that is running right through the whole club at the moment. The Sharks, their seconds, right down to the under-18s. The whole thing just looks to be in a great place at the moment. How much of that is down to our friend Neil Hinnigan? Possibly quite a lot. He mentioned to me early last season that the objective was potentially just to gain the respect back from their peers, particularly the other border clubs, and my word, they've done that in spades this season. They've, as you say, they've went about their business, they've kept their feet on the ground, they've not got above their station, and they wholeheartedly deserve to win the title and come up. And Dale mentioned about additional border derbies now in the Premiership. As a Jed man, essentially. Jed v Kelso back in the top division is just absolutely mouth-watering, I think, for both clubs. That's kind of there's a close relationship there, if you like, between the clubs, and it's many years since they've battled it out in the top division, and that really does whet the appetite for next season.
Are you putting your hand up to commentate that one, are you?
I'll take that one if it's going. Yeah.
I mean, how are they going to cope in the Premiership then? That's the other thing. I mean, they've been out of it for 20 odd years.
Neil Hinnigan, in terms of directors of rugby, and he's young, but he's got so much experience, especially with top quality teams. He's been at Heriots, and he's been there, and he's been at the top level of Scottish club rugby, and then when it did that transition into semi-pro, he has been a great acquisition back for Kelso, and I think they'll be well prepared. They've got the experience in there with the likes of Bruce McNeil as well. Frankie Robson played for Gala in the Prem. Andy Tate is an experienced campaigner. They've got experienced personnel, and they will attract players as well. They work hard. I know Neil Hinnigan works hard on recruitment, so he's going to be looking to try and find the personnel and the right personnel to help sustain their place in the Premiership. Because I don't think they'll want to go up and just have a couple of seasons, enjoy it, and then find their place. They want to consolidate towards the top tier of Scottish rugby, and Neil Hinnigan will be wanting to try and make sure that he's got the right people in there to make sure they've got a bit of longevity.
And talking about putting yourself in the shop window, Bruce McNeil's first coaching role at Kelso, along with Kevin Utterson, the two of them as well, full credit.
Oh, definitely. Bruce has got a great way about him, I think, in terms of his the way he still applies himself. I was 23 odd year old when I retired, and I look like a melted wheelie bin. And Bruce McNeil, approaching 40, and he's still putting in the performances he does, still getting selection for the South squad. But not only that, it's the influence on the young players. I think that he's a great example. He's played professional rugby in a different position, reinvents himself, successful at Hawick, especially in sevens as well, and then comes to Kelso and lends his experience. Sometimes people are really knowledgeable. Kev Hutt's exactly the same. He's been a successful professional rugby player coming back to his town. They're role models, and that's what young players in a community, in a club, look up towards. They want people that they can idolise and hope to be or emulate in time, and I think that's the kind of example that McNeil and Utterson bring to Kelso.
Well, Robin Gala, they started off really well, as we expected. Then the wheels came off halfway through the season. Plenty of positives, though. And along with Melrose, they kind of go again next season, obviously, and they'll be renewing their battles with Ayr to try and get into the top flight.
Yeah, it'd be great if all four in the Premiership stayed up next season and one out of Gala or Melrose came up. Gala, it was an interesting one. They, again, after their strong start, they got a couple of injuries to key personnel. Liam Scott was out for a period. That didn't help. And Big Marius was out for a period. Like, I rate him so highly. In that division, he's just an absolute wrecking ball. It takes 3 players to pull him down. And my word, he hits hard in defence. And they missed him for a number of weeks. And I think for the outside looking in, that had a really big effect. And they had some heavy reversals, didn't they, over a sort of 3-4 week period. But they, all credit to them, they sort of turned it round and got back on the horse. The thing that I noticed with Gala is they have quite a lot of potentially good youngsters coming through. So I think if they can keep the nucleus of that squad together, I mean, Angus Dunn is another great player that's in there. If they can keep those good players together and they don't lose too many, of the young boys that are maybe in the pathway and maybe get a word in their ear from the union or whatever that they have to be playing at a higher level or they have to go move and play for somebody else. If they can keep all them together, then they could be in a pretty good place next season.
And what about Melrose?
Melrose is a really interesting one. Melrose first team, the club team, if you like, I think for all the teams that have had that have went into Super 6, it's really, really difficult because in order to get out of that division, National 1, there's one going up again. You either need to bring through great youngsters. Now, if Melrose bring through a great youngster, if they're in the pathway, they're going to get told that you can't play National 1. So they're potentially going to bypass Melrose and go to the Knights. So you go recruit, you bring in Southern Hemisphere boys, whatever you want to do, Canadians, whatever. They turn up. They don't have the same heartstring ties to the club team that a Bruce Colvin or a Donald Crawford have. So a good Kiwi comes in. He shows that he's got plenty about him. What's potentially going to happen there? He's going to get taken by the Knights. So it's almost no matter what Melrose potentially do or what a club team that's affiliated with a Super 6, what they do is they're going to lose their best players potentially one way or another, and that's going to make getting out of a tough division whereby there's only one promotion place all the more difficult for me. But Melrose will keep plugging away. They always do. They'll always be there or thereabouts, but they're just in that sort of quandary position whereby their best players could get cherry picked, and
that's an issue with the system though, because
that's no slur on Melrose. That's
definitely
same.
Not. But then that's like how it should work is the fact that a really good centre comes in from New Zealand. It's almost like it's automatically, if he's really good at Melrose, he will go into the Knights, and it's the buy-in from the rest of the clubs, because that should be, the Southern Knights should be the opportunity for the good Borders players which we've got a list of umpteen players for the South that could be playing at that level. And I think that's where Melrose are in between a rock and a hard place, because they house the Knights, they are going to be the scapegoats, if you will. If they do get good players, they're going to be first pickings, because it's easier to recruit them. It's not necessarily all the time that they're going to be better. They're going to be easier to recruit, especially the young ones.
That's it. That's it. They're there. They're in and around the place on a Tuesday night, a Thursday night. You're absolutely right, Dale. It's really difficult for Melrose to maintain a youngster come through the system or maintain a good import.
And I think that's where the Knights, in my opinion, need to. And I know they're doing a lot of better work than perhaps what they have from the initial offset, because Melrose as a club team were really successful. The Knights were born. The Knights relied heavily on the Melrose team. And then once that starts to splinter a little bit, you're then having to fill gaps. And I think the Knights do need to work hard with the rest of the Borders teams, and not just Border teams, it's maybe just over the border as well. But working hard to make sure that they don't bite their nose off to spite their face. Because if you've got a team, it'll be interesting to see over the next few years what happens to Boroughmuir and Watsonians, because they're two teams, and Stirling. You've got half and half. Heriot's managed to get in the Prem. Ayr almost got in the Prem. Melrose almost in the Prem, and the other three teams. So it'll be so interesting to see the kind of, what the demographics are of those squads over the next kind of 2 or 3 years.
But slightly different for Boroughmuir, because I've heard it mentioned that they're not overly concerned about their club team whatsoever, because they've got this unbelievably good, the best pathway for youngsters outside the private schools by a long chalk, it would appear, and they've got their Super 6 team, and there's the pathway essentially. Great youth set up. Those boys come straight out of that, go straight into the Bears, the Boroughmuir Bears, and great. And whatever happens now with the club team just happens. It's quite, it's sad for a traditionalist really, but Boroughmuir are maybe slightly different, and they've got this wonderful pathway, whereas some of the other clubs don't essentially, but they've still got a club team to cater for, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens there.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. But it has to be different for every club, I suppose. Melrose don't have the beauty of having that the age. We've got a really good strong semi-junior, but if Boroughmuir's club team has to go by the wayside, and that's the way that they go, it's so congested in Edinburgh. But well, thank God we're not in Edinburgh.
Well, just before we leave National 1, a word about Bert Grigg, who's done pretty well, hasn't he, for Melrose, and he's now moving on within the SRU. So yet again, Melrose looking for a head coach.
I think it's going to be interesting to see who takes the job. I think Gala and Melrose, the coaching positions there, are going to be key as to where they're going to be in the next couple of years. And we've said, like, Melrose have always, since I started doing rugby commentary or coverage or whatever, I've always, as a player as well, I've always looked at Melrose as the kind of shining example. I've never really had an issue with their identity as a rugby team and how they play. Gala, when I started playing, they were almost the same. Great brand of rugby. They were a bit lower at the time, and then through George Graham, they played really good rugby. They had an identity. Then it fell away, and you do wonder, if you don't get the right personnel in at Melrose, if that is something else that can happen. But I don't know. I've not heard any names who's going to be in the mix. But Melrose they're almost similar to Hawick. Like, success is ingrained in their club. Like, it's, if you're another Border team or you're another Border rugby player listening just now, you're probably seething at me saying that. But they are, they've been successful for years, and they've had so many great players go through their clubs. So, the next appointment for them is going to be really key, and hoping that they can get back to the kind of the top levels.
Well, International 2, and your club, Peebles, comfortable really all season, to be honest, for no real threat of being in that bottom 5 where we saw a mass exit International 3 due to the league reconstruction next season.
I think they flatter to deceive at times. I think, obviously they run Glasgow Accies. I think they beat them.
Twice.
Beat them twice.
And lost to Falkirk twice.
Lost to Falkirk, struggled against Newton Stewart, struggled against Boroughmuir. So, they struggled against Berwick as well.
And Hamilton as well.
Yeah, and I think that is unfortunately, and I'm going to get lynched if I go back to Peebles, but I think that is, we talk about success and communities and stuff. Peebles are in the early setting of making sure that success and that culture of rugby is really ingrained in the community. Like, you look at what their age grade stuff's doing now, they've done great work. Obviously, the way that'll be managed in the future is going to change slightly, because George Blair's obviously not going to be part of the youth development setup, but they've got key personnel, a really strong school as well. But for the senior side, as a rugby club, we've always flirted with little bits of success. For years, for all the time my dad was playing, they were an average rugby team. That took years to even beat Walkerburn, and then because they were successful, and then they eventually start to climb up the ranks. The town grows, it gets bigger. It's a byproduct of what happens in your community, and the plaudits are that Peebles are doing great work in their community, making sure that they are the beating heart of it all. The rugby club's a vibrant place. It's a really safe environment for youngsters to grow and develop and learn. But what comes with that is making sure that you get that success on the pitch as well. So the age grade team, obviously the under 16s and under 18s, a successful season so far, in 15s, national finals. They've got to. It's then trying to create that throughout the senior teams as well. But Peebles have been able to send out two sides every weekend, and for a Nat 2 team, I think that's pretty successful. They'll be disappointed not to be in the mix at the end of the season, but that is because of their form.
Well, also in National 2, Berwick, brilliant in some matches, frustrating in others, and before finally coming good last week at Pennypit Park, where they did what they had to do, which was to beat Preston Lodge to stay in the league and remain a top 30 club side in Scotland.
Indeed, what a great amount of bottle shown last weekend, first of all, and congratulations to Berwick. I think staying up, having been promoted into a league where 5 come back down, I think that's a great achievement, and if they'd done that by the skin of their teeth, then so what? Almost, they've consolidated. There's some good players there. I think if they can consolidate in that league, they can look to kick on again.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, the likes of Aidan Rosie, obviously Jack Webster, who's a wily customer who's been, at the coalface for a while. And
I really like Rosie. Actually, you mentioned him. I really like him. I've no idea if any are, and I'm not trying to talk him out of Berwick at all. But if somebody was to say to me that other clubs had a wee eye on him, I would not be surprised at all.
Yeah, and then you've got the Thompson brothers and everything. But what you find with Berwick is that, I mean, there's an incredible amount of loyalty at that club, and that's really helped them because they've been able to build on that and cement a team that knows what they're doing. As I say, it was frustrating because they lost at Boroughmuir, they lost at Hamilton, who were the two bottom clubs. Other times they would get really close and they would actually beat some of the top teams as well. And then they would lose at the very last kick of the game, etc., which meant that instead of 4 points, suddenly it went to 1 point. And it all culminated in the fact that they had to literally beat Preston Lodge on Saturday, which they did, and they did it comfortably. But they're a team that could have been a lot higher. Yeah,
they probably would admit that as well. But coming up, and sometimes some of the teams you play, it can depend on when in the season you play them. If you're playing against the city team, are the students around, or are the students all cleared out for Christmas or whatever? And it can just be the luck of the draw sometimes, and injuries and all that kind of stuff. And there are one as well as their on-field achievements, which I do deem that to be an achievement. Staying up in that division of all divisions, they're just a wonderful community club as well.
OK, that's the National Leagues sorted out. We're going to the East League now. East League 1, a disappointing rebuilding season, I guess, for Duns, who finished bottom of the pile. But East 2 saw Langham finish top of the table with just one defeat all season. Very, very impressive.
Yeah, especially after last year when they just missed out. They had their big year, their big centenary year, and they were looking to mark that with some success. It's great to see them get that this year, and even with everything that's went on in that league with a couple of rearranged fixtures, I think Langham, you say it about Kelso, and I don't think it matters what level. I think they've went about their business pretty well, and in such a remote area, Langham, it's got such a rich rugby history, so it's nice to see them have that success again, because they've in times, probably the most recent times, it's been difficult. They've probably seen some of their best players leave to play in teams like Hawick, and you think of Russell Anderson, he's been away, and Bailey Donaldson, and his
Palmer Hislop, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So these players have went away to play rugby elsewhere. It's nice to see them, welcome that nucleus back, and I think that's one of the things Super Series has given us, Super 6 and Super Series has given us, is brought that community clubs back a little bit more. And I think that players maybe don't chase that success, and it might be because there's maybe not as much money going about in the game now, but players are just quite happy to play for the community club, put the badge on the chest, and go out on a Saturday. And I think Langham are a shining light of that.
Hoyt Lindeen also in that division. Difficult season for them, ending with no wins, but despite difficulties in getting a team together all season, we do give them a lot of credit for slugging it out and completing the season, which was great for the other clubs.
Absolutely. You mentioned there, you go down the divisions, and particularly, there's so many there's so many rugby teams in Hawick, and for teams at that level to be able to fulfil fixtures, I think, is just an achievement itself. And I don't mean that in a condescending, it's just a fact of life. And yeah, the Lindeen, they battle on, and that is, it's a trait that runs right through Hawick, and they will continue to do so. Absolutely. Where they go from here, could they do with probably a few more bodies? But I think, if memory serves, they had quite a few injuries this season as well, and all credit to them, really, because of the way they battle on with the resources they have.
And some of these clubs, they rely on 5 or 6 players, and if they all get injured more or less at the same time, then you're really, facing an uphill struggle.
Yeah, and I think that, the issues that you get at top level rugby, you might have a stag do, or you might have a wedding or something like that. There's sometimes a little bit more of a commitment at that level, which is fine, but it's a fact of the way the levels of rugby. As you get lower down, sometimes it can just be a stag do, and you've lost 5, 6, 7 players. Those 5, 6, 7 players might be the key players. It might be the players that you lose in your front row. so. It might be the players who you rely on week in, week out, or you've got injuries. And it's just the nature of it. And I think sometimes it's difficult because it makes those leagues so volatile. It can be a busy year for, a certain age group, or it can be a bad run of injuries, and all of a sudden you drop like a stone. So it's, I think it's been a difficult year for them, but they've trudged on, they've worked hard to try and fulfil all their fixtures, and they're continuing to do so. So, yeah, credit to them, I'd say.
And if we're looking for a roller coaster ride, what about Hawick Harlequins from 3 or 4 years ago? They won East League One, turned down promotion because most of the boys that got them there were on the brink of retirement. So and then of course they folded for a year because they couldn't get people together. Regrouped again, East League 3, come out firing, unbeaten in the East League 3 all season, champions, and just failed to win the East League Bowl.
Yeah, and I think that that's we've spoke about it. I think we're all up for the run for Cornet at Hawick this year because we've praised them that much in the show. But it's just the way that Hawick teams in the Hawick community are. They galvanise themselves so well, and I think obviously as a club, there's I don't want to use the word stubborn, but they certainly would not want to see a club die and be just put on the scrap heap, and it is history. They want to try and build that history and continue it. So brilliant effort with their backs against the wall when everything was up against them, to come back, get the players back, get them training, get all the volunteers. I think and I'm probably guilty of it more than anybody else, because you talk about the players all the time and the ones that are on the field, but it's the volunteers round about that are organising washing kits, getting buses, getting transport organising their games and things, doing their teas, after match teas and stuff. So to get that community back again after not playing rugby for so long, it's brilliant. And so the fact that they've got a championship to show for it is probably just desserts for them.
And Robin, I think one of the good things about this year when we started Borders Rugby Radio is that we were able to go a little bit more in depth into these clubs like East League 3 and people like Stuart Walker at Galloway YM, Aaron Patterson at Earlston, been keeping us up to date with what's happening in the club. And for both of the teams, not a fantastic season, but Galloway YM managed, I think, 4 wins. Earlston got 1 win, which they were absolutely delighted with because, they all know their own levels and they're all there playing kind of social rugby, but when they do get that win, it's really treasured.
Oh yeah, and going back to what we were saying about the Lindeen, it can be a challenge for any team to get numbers. And you mentioned the word social there, and the more teams down the pyramid, if you like, that are just playing rugby for whatever the reason, is it because you're a young player and you want to move up the ranks, move up the leagues, then great. Is it because it gets you out the house on a Saturday and you don't need to go shopping or whatever, or do whatever? But or if it's just to get out, get a few beers after it with your friends, who knows what the reasons are? But just to have people playing rugby down the divisions is great, because it kind of props up the whole thing.
And that's what our good friend Ian Milne has always said about, there's not enough bad rugby players, which I guess included yourself, Dale.
Yeah, exactly. I don't do this for my well-being, but I think Robin's alluded to it there. It's a social aspect. The rugby and the training. The 80 minutes of rugby, the match, is just a byproduct of everything else that you get. The connections, the friendships that you make, the nights out, the bus trips that Selkirk certainly enjoy. Those are the things that you remember. You don't remember really training on a Tuesday, Thursday night every week. And most of the games that I played for people, you forget about because you remember the nights out, you remember the...
Not surprised.
Yeah, I know, man. Especially for performance related. But, but you remember the nights out, you remember the tours, you remember the people, the funny stories, the dinners. That's it. And you replicate. It doesn't matter what level of rugby. Melrose have the same as what Earlston do. They're a couple of miles apart, but in terms of rugby ability, they're completely in different stratospheres. But they've still got the fabric of a rugby club, the dinners, the connections, the bar, the nights out. That's what it's about. And they're a huge part of the community. And we would hate to see any other rugby clubs. It's a difficult time for most clubs anyway, but we don't want to see any other rugby clubs go to the wall. And it's great to see everybody this season being able to be relatively successful, whatever success is to them.
So, Robin, what about the ladies? Kelso ladies flying the flag for women's rugby in the Borders. They won the East Conference, losing just once, and they'll be pretty happy with that, I would think. Oh, absolutely. To win the conference, you're absolutely right. Again, great effort. There's very little by way of ladies rugby here in the Borders, sadly. So for Kelso to continually get numbers, and
fulfil fixtures and be successful in the fixtures that are being fulfilled, absolutely great. You know, there's a great job being done there, and we mentioned earlier about Kelso as a club as a whole. It's just more success that can be attributed to them this season. Success on the field, success off the field, everybody pulling in the same direction. They are one club at the moment.
And Lisa Thompson, Lana Skeldon and Chloe Rowley, of course, very high-profile women's rugby players, all from the area, have all been involved with Langham and Hawick and Melrose Ladies and other clubs as well, Gala, Vixens. And it's good to see that all the clubs are actually having some kind of success with bringing women on into the game.
Yeah, and I think that, you know, obviously Kelso ladies have been, as you say, flying the flag, and we've heard from them most weeks on the programme, which is great. You know, it's been such a great addition, because it's going to take time. We had probably quite a lengthy discussion a few months ago about the women's rugby in the region, and it is going to take time. It has to start somewhere, and Kelso ladies have been very, very progressive, I think, in terms of, you know, really, really backing it. And I think, you know, Robin said at the start about the culture in Kelso Rugby Club, and he obviously listed the teams, the Sharks, you know, and also the women. You know, they do have a really good, you know, safe rugby environment there, and you know, they've had some great games, they've had some tough games in the season, but that's a rugby season, and you know, obviously to have some success at the end is brilliant, and hopefully that helps. You know, the exposure as well, you know, to get them on the show most weeks, explaining about the games, get more people down to Poynter Park to watch them. You know, that could be the thing that's going to then revitalise another team or reignite another club to really promote in their women's division. So, you know, small steps, but it's certainly a huge gain this year, getting the Kelso ladies back.
Hawick Harlequins and Galloway M both have matches in East League 3 tomorrow to bring an end to their seasons, but nothing at stake really. So let's concentrate on this weekend. It's Kings of the Sevens action with Kelso tomorrow and Earlston on Sunday, the last of the double headers, if you like. A quick look at the table. Melrose topping with 30 points. Edinburgh Accies in second with 26. Gala have 23. Watsonians 21. Peebles in fifth place, 19. Joint 6, Kelso and Hawick with 16 apiece. In eighth position, it's Selkirk on 15. Jed Forest now beginning to motor with a 7 and a 5-pointer. They're up to 12, but they're still in ninth position. That could all change, of course, this weekend with 20 points at stake. And Berwick with 6 points in 10th position at the moment. So the last 2 weekends, we've seen Kelso win the National 1 title. Last week, they beat some quality sides, including Jed Forest, in the final to lift the Langham Sevens title for the first time since 2010, and only their 9th win at Milltown since 1908. So let's hear from Director of Rugby at Kelso and our colleague at Borders Rugby TV and Radio, Neil Hinnigan, who's targeting a third week of celebrations.
The first team squad obviously looking to back up a great result at Langham last week. Won't be easy given that it's a really tight draw. Probably all 12 teams will be coming thinking they have a chance, and rightly so. I think Jed went well last week, obviously just a bit unlucky, so they're just starting to pepper at the right time. Melrose are always thereabouts, and they'll be looking to go better than they did last week, and I'm sure they will. I think they've got some returning players, so they should go well. Also looking at Northumbria Uni maybe bringing something a little bit different, so yeah, it should be a good tournament, competitive, really competitive, I would say. So hopefully, as I say, that it all goes to plan, and hopefully we can see the home team reach the final and get the crowd going well as well. Down in the marquee, I think at the hospitality, there's around, with upstairs and in the tent, there'll be around 400 people there. So that's massive for the club, obviously. Great support, and it brings much needed funds in. So we're very appreciative of that. And same to our sponsors, HE Builders Limited. They've decided to come on board for the first time sponsoring, so we're massively grateful to them as well for their support. We hope it's a good day, and we hope everyone enjoys themselves, and you know, it'll bring the curtain down on what's been a big season at Poynter, obviously winning the National 1 title and so on. So yeah, just hopefully this is a good last dance for everyone at Poynter for this season, and looking at the next season.
Well, Dale, I think he must be buzzing inside, Neil.
Yeah, definitely. You know, he's we've waxed lyrical about his impact back at Kelso, and I think it's you know, it's just great to see another team get a lot of success. You know, and it's not just in 15s because they've had an immaculate season in the National 1, but obviously to pick up that after what was a huge weekend up in Highland. So, you know, definitely the season's certainly not done yet. There's still a lot of rugby to be played in terms of the sevens. They'll be wanting to have a good showing at their own sevens as well, but there's still a lot to play for, and their squad's in a really, really good position, I think, and out with the Kings of the Sevens table, it is. There's tournaments to be won, there's good positions, there's good pools, good draws, but certainly Kelso are not in a bad position in the table, if they can string some results together.
And it's wide open, this Kings of the Sevens table. I mean, we've just read them out, 20 points at stake this weekend, and this traditionally is the weekend where you get down to maybe 2 or 3 teams who are going to hit it out, but there's up to 8 teams here could still in with a chance.
Yeah, it's a bit like golf majors where they call Saturday the moving day. This is the moving weekend in the Kings of the Sevens, in my opinion. And you mentioned about rigged draws and the potential lack of rigged draws. That could be what's reflecting in the fact that we've had 6 different tournaments and 6 different winners. Spoke about it in commentary last weekend. It's a better product when we get to this point, and it doesn't look like there's one team that's just going to romp away with it. Jed last season were absolutely outstanding, but it was a cakewalk at the end. It was a cakewalk as soon as the spring started. Essentially, you could just tell they were going to run away with it, but that's not the case this season. And it just makes for a really good product. And Melrose are top of the pops at the moment, and they've not won a tournament, which is great because it demonstrates the consistency that they've shown. But it shows that it's all there still to play for. And I'd be hard pressed to pick a winner. All the Kings of the Sevens this season. Jed look still like they've got a really, really strong squad. They were a wee bit under strength at Langham and they still got to the final, but they've got it all to do. They probably need to win every tournament now between now and the end of the season, because Melrose and Accies and whatnot will still pick up points. And I really like the look of Kelso as well. They're riding on the crest of a wave at the moment, and they've got that Sevens monkey off their back. It's a long time since they've won a tournament, and they've won one now, and that gives you the confidence, obviously, that you can go out and win these things and beat all the teams that are put in front of it. And they won Langham the hard way as well.
But there's 2 tournaments this weekend where Jed and Melrose are on opposite sides of the draw. And you say, for example, you're going to get a Jed Melrose fight. I know it's not going to be. That's not what we're saying the 2 favourite teams are, but you're only stealing 6 points on them. Yeah. And that's I think that is the beauty of the draw, because if you get them in the first round, and I think that is where probably Melrose, and I get why they obviously seed teams, but I think there's a little bit more intrigue if one of the favourites go out early. We looked at that Jed Edinburgh Accies game at Melrose Sevens, and it could have been pretty much further. It could have been further in the draw.
They were for my money on the day, they were the best 2 Scottish teams there.
I totally agree with you. And then that's, one of them has to go, and there's an intrigue for me in that game. Yes, there's disappointment because you're not going to see one of them again, but that is where the draws are so important, because there's a chance that Melrose and Jed could be drawn in the first round, and there's so much incentive early on, because how many times do we see the draw well laid out, and we've got 40 pointers, 30 pointers, like Berwick was a bit like that, and I think it was because of the time of the season in 15s as well, but there's sometimes a bit of disengagement with the level, and that's where the draws are really important, and that is where it's got the other intrigue as well, because this weekend Jed and Melrose opposite sides of the draw, and if they've got real aspirations of winning Kings of the Sevens, they'll be both hoping that the other one drops out early.
And a pools for Kelso and a knockout for Earlston. Yeah,
which gives a bit of variation. I'm a traditionalist. I still love the knockout format, but I can completely understand why there is the pool format for a number of reasons as well. I think there's a bit of intrigue this weekend when we talk about 20 points up for grabs, because there's some student curveballs in there. Northumbria Uni are a very, very, very strong British Universities Championship university. If they come to Kelso fully loaded, then they could run away with it. Who knows? They're an absolute unknown quantity. And then we look at Sunday, Edinburgh Uni are in there against Jed. Durham Uni, who we know about, are in there against Berwick first round. And if Durham Uni and Jed both win their first round ties, they play each other in the next round. Now, if that squad that was at Melrose for Durham Uni come up on Sunday, then they will take a bit of stopping.
Then you look at the first tie up, Edinburgh Accies versus Melrose, one first and second in Kings of the Sevens, and that's where the beauty of it is, because Edinburgh Accies, especially Berwick, they were unbelievable. And Melrose were as well. They probably punched above their weight, in my opinion, because I've had Jed down as heavy, heavy favourites. And Melrose did a job on them. And then you look at the draw there, you're totally right, Robin, in terms of, you're saying this is going to be a big weekend in teams moving. I think it's really, really intriguing as to, come Sunday night when all the students are in the beer tent at Earlston. But come Sunday night when the dust is settled, I think the Kings of the Sevens table is going to be interesting reading.
Let's mention Aki's there. Much for Aki's will depend on the availability of Lewis Wells, if he's able to play. But unfortunately for Aki's, on Saturday at Langham, Rory Campbell got a sore one. He left the pitch in agony one of the games, and he was later seen in a moon boot hobbling about on crutches, so he's not going to be playing this weekend. But
then they can bring in someone like Richard Mill.
Yeah, they've got a bit of a Sevens pedigree now, which is something that Edinburgh Accies a few years ago, I think round about the time, they got to a couple of finals and just not able to pick up that victory. They were starting to kind of steal the light away from Watsonians a little bit, and I think with the Super 6 coming in, it's kind of blown the wind out of the Watsonian sails. But Edinburgh Accies have had a few years at running it a couple of times, running at Melrose Sevens pretty close. So they've got a real good pedigree at Sevens now. So they'll have players champing at the bit to get in that squad, and especially if they're in second in the Kings of the Sevens table, there'll be conversations. The guys will love their Sevens. It's the young guys now love Sevens. It's not like you go, oh Christ, we've got Sevens to play for another 5 weeks. Like, people are geared up for it, want to play it. So they'll have people waiting in the wings. Whether they'll have people as good as Rory Campbell, I think he's brilliant at Sevens. I doubt that, but they'll have people that will be able to fill in because their squad's strong. And it's good to see these Edinburgh sides. I mean, Watsonians have always, supported the Kings of the Sevens, and Edinburgh Accies in the last sort of 5-6 years have really stepped up.
Yeah, we say it all the time. It seems, but it should continually be said just how well those two clubs in particular support the circuit. If overnight those two teams decided we can't really be bothered with it anymore, then it really is going to impact on our product. So all credit to what they bring to the party. And they haven't won at Kelso, so again that's another little target that they'll be wanting to achieve, like the Berwick Sevens. They won that for the very first time. Yeah, and there's no reason that they can't turn up at Kelso, and they're second in the King's table. They are one of the favourites this Saturday, no doubt about it. Well, we're live at both tournaments, 1:30 for the start of the Kelso Sevens at Poynter Park, with Robin Purdie, Neil Hinnigan, Andrew Fleming and Kelly Mitchell joining me for that. And on Sunday we're on air at 1 o'clock with Dale Clancy, Graham Dodds, Sam Matthews and Neil Hinnigan, both events going through to around 6:30. It's interesting actually because at Kelso they put 18 minutes down for the ties, but at Earlston it's 20 minutes for the ties, so eventually you get to a 6 o'clock final, I think, in both of them. But let's change now to the South, who are preparing for their inter-district clash with Edinburgh on Tuesday the 9th of May at Netherdale. It's a 7 o'clock kick-off for that. They've had 2 training sessions now with the 39-man squad still intact, and let's hear the latest from Wednesday's training session with the man in charge, Matty Douglas. Well, Matty, session number 2 is over. I noticed you took a more observing role today.
Yeah, no, look, it was just to see where we were at, and as a coach, I quite like that, just standing in behind and pitching in when needed, because look at the quality coaches we've got. The 3 of them are, they're high up in their roles at their own club, so I didn't have to stand and put too much input in. But what I see, then I'll input if there's any needed or whatever. But look, the boys trained well again. They've upped it from last week, and they're all vying for a place against Edinburgh.
Makes it even more difficult for you.
Yeah, it does, and again tonight you've got boys stepping up, and there's a lot of them putting their hand in the ring for it, and they'll have to. It's a big squad in there, so the quality and the accuracy upped again, and look, it's great to be able to have these sessions when we're still in busy season. There's still 15s going on and double weekend of 7, so it's great buy-in for the players to come down a gala and get another session in.
Everyone's talking about the cull from 39, but that's on hold for a wee while.
Yeah, look, we just looked at that at the start of the week. We've got a double header of 7s this weekend at Kelso and Earlston, and there's a lot of these boys that will be playing Saturday, Sunday, and look, we didn't want to cut it, then we have injuries and whatnot, so it gives the boys another opportunity next Wednesday to put their hand in the ring for that team run on the Monday night. So look, it's just to give these players one more session, but also looking at injuries if there is it, if we did cut it and have to call boys back in.
Of course, it's great to have the buy-in from the punters, the public, who are really looking at this with a great deal of interest. Tuesday the 9th of May down here at Netherdale, and we expect a big crowd, a lot of a buy-in from all the clubs, which is fantastic, and a lot of chat, of course, about who should be in and who should be captain, etc.
So the captaincy will probably be next week, I would say. Once the team's announced, we'll probably look to announce the team on the Thursday after the session. But look, the feedback we've had from the clubs, it's always tough in the Borders when you bring things like this in, and are you got to get buy-in? As the public got to look at it, and you see social media is kind of blown up with it, and the amount of following that we're getting on the social media platforms, and it's hopefully we're hoping for a big crowd here on that Tuesday night, and it's what these players deserve. I said it last week, they worked so hard through the season, and it's now their chance to show what they can do, and really kick on into Club International next season. And there's a lot of players who have probably got a point to prove as well, that have maybe been at Super 6 or have been at that higher level, and what they can show what they can do week in, week out in the club game.
You've got 4 Premiership clubs to choose from, and also 3 of the top 4 from National 1. There's quality there.
Oh, there's a lot of quality, and that's the tough part, and it showed tonight. I think last week was a bit of, you're gelling, you're getting everybody in and for the first time, but tonight straight away they were straight in, and you can see the quality shining through, and the experienced players starting to step up and starting to put their hand in the ring. But on the flip side, you've got a lot of young talent in there. It shows, and even in the national leagues, that Kelso team, how many young players are in there, and through the Premiership as well, like say Andrew McCombs, and we've been impressed with Dwayne coming in as well, who wasn't in the initial squad, and he's really stepped up. So you've got an abundance of young talent, but you also need those older heads. Like, it's great to have Bruce McNeil and Bruce Colvin, players like that have been there and have got the the caps for Scotland club team and whatnot, and they just bring these younger players on.
A lot of potential captains there, certainly. Some are different than others. Some are a bit noisier. Some are a bit more nippy. What sort of captain are you looking for? Someone who's a bit quieter, maybe, and won't be pushed back 10 metres?
I know you're on about there. Look, captain, this is what these sessions are for. It's who steps up, who pulls the players in when it's not going right, and who is who's got a lead for the front. And that's what a South team needs, a captain that really leads by example through performance, through the off field. And I'll be honest, it's there's a number of players in there that could do that, and it's got to be tough to try and pick one, but there is a few boys in there that'll do the job and step up when needed.
Obviously, the other squads have been announced: Edinburgh and Glasgow, and also Caledonia. There's some big players amongst them. I mean, you just have to look at Edinburgh, and obviously there's Curry. There's also Edinburgh Academicals, who finished second and third in the table as well. It's not going to be a walk in the park, is it?
No, it's not. And I think when you look at, for example, that Edinburgh team, you look at the coaching team as well that they've got in there. They're going with real intent as well, and we have to be ready for that. And I think it shows. I think there's about 13 or 14 Curry players in there and 8 Accies players, so they're all building around a core bunch of guys, and that'll be a really tough game, I would say, going by the quality that they've picked, and that's why we're prepping as best as we can. And to be honest, I think the crowd will play a massive part in it as well. We'll need their support against an Edinburgh side that will come down here confident, and top of the ground as an City sides, they like to move the ball, and we need to bring that bit hunger and that bit energy, and really take it to them and show how hard a place these border clubs are to come and play.
And everyone is taking it completely 100% seriously.
Yeah, they are. And when you read bits and pieces like what Cali's up to and what Glasgow's up to, they're all prepping. There's no one session, they're getting 2 or 3 in there, and and I think that's what you need to showcase what these players can do. Bring them in, give them a structure, but then let them express themselves. And what better way to do it than here at Netherdale, when, as I say, the crowd, if we can get a bit of buy-in, will play a huge part in what we're wanting.
So 39 and holding at the moment. You will have to make that cull at some point. How are you going to do that?
It's got to be tough, but look, we're as a coaching group, we're starting to see partnerships form in training, and look, we'll come together next Wednesday, and then from there a team will be picked for the game against Edinburgh. It's obviously hard because Hawick are in the cup final on the Saturday, and trying to train Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. It's got to take a bit on these players' bodies, so as a coaching team we're going to have to manage that. But look, it'll be as strong a team as we can put out. And we'll be one thing's at the front of the mind, and it's great to be able to bring this together, but we're in this to win it, and we said that for the start, and looking what we've got, I think we'll have a really competitive squad on that Tuesday night. night. As a coaching team, for players that maybe didn't quite make it, we'll get in touch with them. That's how I work. I like to notify them, and at the end of the day, they're not done. If they didn't make that 23, it's a lot of players. It's basically a team to cut. There's injuries, and then we've got that game on the Sunday. So they boys will then come back in the week after, just like a training camp, and then go from there. If boys aren't performing or whatever, they'll get an opportunity on the 21st of May. So Luke will look at that as coaches, how we announce it, but there will be disappointed boys, but it's how they react to that and how they push the squad forward that are playing on the Tuesday night.
And of course the good thing is Inter-District is back to stay, and you've got 2 games, and then there's next year and the year after.
Yeah, it is, and I think that's the big the challenge for us is to keep these boys motivated for now, and I said it last week that if we can get by in May, then I think we'll have no problem at all in the kind of that break over Christmas, and I don't know when it's going to be, but it'll be in that kind of around December, January time, I would have thought, and for then there's probably boys performing in the National Leagues, the Premiership again, that we'll look to bring in. This isn't a squad for 2 or 3 years. There'll be opportunities to bring players in, so these boys just need to perform now and push forward for once Club International comes.
Busy chap is Matty, no doubt about that, preparing a Hoyt team for the Cup final on the 6th of May and the South for Edinburgh on the 9th of May.
Yeah, deservedly so. Busy, and he should be busy because he's fully justified in being the South coach, given his his achievements for Hoyt this season, and I've been so impressed with him ever since he came through the door, essentially as the coach at Hoyt. But this season in particular, just love the way he goes about his work, love the cut of his jib in his interviews, that kind of stuff. And yeah, he looks to me like a young coach that is going places.
And Matt is definitely the coach of the moment. I think you'd agree with that as well, Dale, for Borders Rugby.
Bold decision by Hoyt Rugby Club to instil him as head coach, you would say. A very bold decision, and it has been a decision that has been rewarded. And I think, it's great to see a young coach from the Borders come through. We've got him, Ian Chisholm's in there as well. Players who are good players in their own right, quality players in their own right, that are now, continuing that passion into coaching. It's not for everybody, but it's certainly something that they've certainly got a knack for. Ian Chisholm's getting a tune out of Peebles and really developing young players, but Matty Douglas has been able to get a tune out of experienced players and players that have been playing rugby for Hoyt for years and littering it with that youthful exuberance as well. So he's definitely, it's been a great season for him. Big learning season last year for him as well, and he's certainly, taken those lessons forward and implemented some changes. And I don't think he's really, quite a quiet guy, but he's not afraid to make some big decisions.
Right then, we're going to put you both on the spot now. The 39 will remain in place until the next training session on Wednesday, when Matty and his team of Ian Chisholm of Peebles, Bert Greig of Melrose and Andrew Clark from Musselburgh will have the dreadful task of finding a 23-man squad, meaning we're going to lose 16 players in all. So let's look at the 39-man squad and see who you would have if you were choosing the starting 15 squad to start tomorrow. It's going to be an interesting debate, and right off the bat, let's say that any of the 39 selected could easily do a job in red and white striped shirt if chosen, but decisions have to be made, and we'll see how many you get right when the actual squad is selected in a few days' time. Of course, not always the best individual players will be selected. Sometimes a blend of two can make the difference, and how well they gel together. So let's start with fullback, shall we? Dale, you can start us off.
I think this is one of the easier positions to pick at the moment. I think the player that I've kind of looked at there that has improved kind of year on year, Kirk Ford, I think has been a solid operator at fullback. I'd play him as well because he's got a really natural ability to slot into the first receiver position as well. I think kicking has been really important for Hoyt, and I think looking at that squad at the moment, I'd be popping Kirk Ford in the 15 jersey.
Robin,
couldn't agree more. Easiest position for me to pick. Everything he does, it comes with time, and that's the mark of a class player. So he's in at 15 for me, and he's my goal kicker as well.
Okay, and I've written that down as well, so we're all in agreement for that one. Let's have a look at some of our colleagues, of course, who have also had the task to come up today at short notice with their starting 15, and it's interesting. Let's start with Neil Hinnigan, who goes for Paul Cunningham of Musselburgh. Sam Matthews goes with Kirk Ford, Andrew Fleming goes with Kirk Ford, Graham Dodds goes with Kirk Ford, and Kelly Mitchell goes for Kirk Ford as well. So by majority, Kirk Ford is going to be our fullback in the south. What about wingers?
Robin, I'll give you the duty for first one.
Tough to call. I'm going Watt from Musselburgh on one wing. I'm struggling with the other one between the three of them, but I'm going to plump for McKean.
I've agreed with McKean. I think he's had a good season, scored a lot of tries in the Prem, and I think just looking at the squad, just looking at the backs, I would have quite a one-dimensional backline, so I'm wanting somebody quite different, and I think Ben Gill gives you that on the wing. I think he's a powerful winger, he's quick, but I just think he gives you something different. I think he would really flourish in a team with a lot of more quality players. That's not to say Gallagher's not quality, but you're bringing the best of the best into the one squad, and I think Ben Gill would flourish in that environment.
And this highlights the interesting part where a lot of people who have been selecting, and what the coaches have got to do as well, is decide, do you get your best players on the park in maybe positions they're not too familiar with? And Neil Hinnigan, he's gone for Ronan McKean. He's got Angus Roberts in there on the other wing. Sam has gone with Ronan McKean and Gregor Young, who is down as centre, but of course you could play him on the wing. Andrew Fleming's gone with exactly what Dale Clancy has said, Ben Gill and Ronan McKean. Graham Dodds has gone for Sandy Watt and Ronan McKean. Ronan McKean and Donald Crawford on the wing for Kelly Mitchell, and my choices are Gregor Young and Ronan McKean. So again, you see an interesting selection from different people. So let's move on to the centres, and again, a very tricky decision. Let's start with Dale.
Yeah, I think Andrew Mitchell's in there. He's been brilliant this season. I think helped by having somebody who covers him pretty well, allows him to do his job. I think Andrew Mitchell, because he's young and he's been exciting, he's been probably tasked with doing a little bit too much, taking on too much responsibility, and I think that obviously Ethan Riley's allowed him to flourish, so I'm going to pop Donald Crawford alongside him. I think having a playmaker beside him, somebody with a bit of pace, somebody who's not scared to defend as well, I think it's quite, again, they're big, quite similar players, like to cut a line, but they can play rugby, and I think that's going to be important. I think Donald Crawford and Mitchell.
Well, that's what I've gone for, actually. What about you, Robin?
Can't disagree with that. Yeah, really difficult to choose between the four of them, to be honest. All really, really good players. But yeah, I agree with you guys on that one.
Okay, Neil Hinnigan doesn't agree. He agrees about Mitchell, but he would put Gregor Young in at centre with Mitchell. Sam says Aaron McComb and Donald Crawford. Andrew Fleming's gone with Donald Crawford and Frankie Robson. Graham Dodds goes with Gregor Young and Andrew Mitchell. Kelly Mitchell goes with Andrew Mitchell and Craig Dodds at centre. So again, you've got interesting combinations.
I did think about Hutchison as a 12.
I thought about McComb as a 12, but I didn't like McComb and Hutchison together for some reason. It just didn't fit with me, but I would be a terrible coach. So I think that's one of the hardest positions I found to fill. I was never ever doubting Mitchell. I think his partner was important, because I think he'll be important for the South, Mitchell, and it's how you bring the best out of him, and you need somebody who's going to take a lot of experience, somebody who's going to take a lot of pressure off him. And I think looking at that, Robson was one, but I think they might clash a little bit in terms of their styles. It's a hard one to pick, and you're never going to know until they're playing together and you're trying positions, but I think it was one of the hardest ones to pick. I did really consider moving McComb to 12, but... And
this shows exactly what the main guys, the Matty Douglases and the Ian Chisholms and the Burt Griggs...
But they know what they're on about. So that's the difference. That's the difference here.
Oh yes, we're representing Joe Punter here.
Armchair quarterbacks here.
Okay, fly half then. And the nominees, here we go, are Craig Dodds, Struan Hutchison and Aaron McComb.
Hutchison, for me, too good a rugby player not to be somewhere in that back line. Like I say, could slot in at 12, could probably do a job at 15 as well. Really, really rate him. Whether or not he remains in National 1 will remain to be seen. I would imagine there will be suitors for his signature, but yeah, I really like him as a player. Great goal kicker as well, reads the game brilliantly. Tough boy, great in defence. So again, Craig Dodds though, Aaron McComb, good players, but for me, yeah, I'm going Hutchison.
I've got a sniff of a rumour there from Robin Purdie, thinking that there's maybe he knows somebody who's going to be snapping up Hutchison.
No, not at all, not at all. I think he'll be a man in demand.
I totally agree. I did find this difficult as well, because I was wanting to put Hutchison at 10 with McComb at 12, and I didn't quite like the way that was lining up, so I have put Aaron McComb at fly half. I think he's a player who's slightly at times unflappable. He looks really controlled. But another player who looks like he's got loads of time, but he takes the ball to the line, which I think players like Crawford and Mitchell need. They need somebody to give them the ball in a congested area so they can batter through. Hutchison equally is able to do that. I think you're probably spoilt with certainly with those two. Craig Dodds is a different style of 10, and for me, the squad I'm picking, he probably doesn't suit into what I would try and do. But you change a couple of players out, and Craig Dodds slots in there quite easily because his basics skills are probably the best in that back line. But yeah, McComb.
Okay, I was really toying with Craig Dodds and Struan Hutchison, and in the end went with Struan Hutchison. But of course, I mean, you look at the goal kicking as well. Kirk Ford, absolutely superb. You've got Hutchison, you've got Craig Dodds, who's obviously a coach within the SRU. One of the head people there. I mean, you've got some tremendous options for goal kicker as well. Of the others, Neil Hinnigan went for Struan Hutchison, so did Sam Matthews, so did Andrew Fleming, so did Kelly Mitchell. But Graham Dodds went for Craig Dodds as his number 10. And so to scrum half.
Scrum half for me, I think you could pick any of those players for different reasons.
There's obviously Danny Owenson from Musselburgh, there's Bruce Colvin, Melrose, and Gareth Welsh from Hawick. They're the three scrum halves who've been selected in the 39.
I think this will be interesting to hear everybody's decisions, because I think I would imagine if anybody's picked Hutchison, I think they would like Colvin beside them. Perhaps not, and I think because I've picked McComb, I want Welsh. I think Welsh is a really quick tempo 9, and I think the South are going to want to play rugby. They're going to have a big pack, but they want to play rugby as well. And I think to get the best out of McComb, you need somebody who's quick, like what he has with Jack Hamilton at Selkirk. So I've went Gareth Welsh.
Gareth Welsh for you, Robin?
Welsh, just shading it for me. Again, three wonderful players. Owenson's a really good player as well, and BC obviously great player. But Welsh, I've been really impressed with him this season. I think the competition. And it's almost strange to say he's the South starting 9, because he's not featured in every single game and not started every single game for Hawick. But I think the competition for his place has brought out the best in him. I think he's greatly improved this season, and for me, he's my starting South 9.
And of course, Hector Patterson is the guy you were referring to, who is obviously playing Super Series rugby, and the Super Series boys are not part of the South. It's for literally club only, although when we come to the likes of Dalton Redpath in the second row, he's been guesting for Edinburgh A, and that's absolutely fine. Okay, so what has everyone else said? Well, I said Gareth Welsh over Bruce Colvin. And again, it was one of those toss of the coins, because they're both excellent, and certainly whichever one I would have gone for, I'd put Bruce Colvin on the bench, but Gareth Welsh for me. But that's not universally accepted. Neil Hinnigan's gone for Bruce Colvin. Sam Matthews gone for Bruce Colvin. Graham Dodds has gone for Bruce Colvin. Kelly Mitchell has gone with Bruce Colvin. And the only other to agree with us is Andrew Fleming, who puts Gareth Welsh. So 4 apiece there.
Yeah, I think it shows the competition at scrum half. It certainly does. So it's it's interesting how other people line up their squads. But yeah, I think there's loads of combinations you can have in that back line. But it's interesting to see that we're all not far away, but we're still some distance apart as well with some players.
Loose head then. We've got Sean Muir, Craig Owenson, and Luke Petty in the lineup. Robin?
Muir for me. Hawick captain, talisman. Plays 80 almost every game, has done for the thick end of 10 years probably. Gets tries, carries relentlessly, hits tackles, hits rucks. Sean Muir.
Dale?
Sean Muir, and I'd have him as captain as well.
Okay. Likewise, yeah.
Right, well that sorts that one out then. We'll do the captaincies a little bit later on, which aren't universally for Sean Muir, incidentally, so that's going to be interesting. I've gone for Sean Muir as captain as well, at loose head. So has Neil Hinnigan, so has Sam Matthews, so has Andrew Fleming, so has Graham Dodds, and so has Kelly Mitchell. So the only one that we've actually got right across the board at the moment at loose head is Sean Muir. So we're going to tight heads now. Nicky Little, Paulo Ferreira and Callum Cruikshanks.
I was between two. and I've went for Nicky Little. The reasons for that will probably be illustrated when you find out who my hooker is, and I think it would be difficult to rip apart a title-winning front row. Agreed.
Nicky Little for me, with Big Paulo on the bench as an impact player.
What an impact he can make.
Yeah, tries in the locker, absolutely.
Yeah, that's what I would go for. Andrew Fleming, the only person who hasn't voted for Nicky Little, he would start with Paulo Ferreira and most probably bring Nicky Little on from the bench. And so we come to hooker, and I think we know where Dale's going with this. Let me just tell you the options here. Matty Carrier, Fraser Rennick and Bruce Riddle.
Rennick for me. Again, he's been a huge welcome back to Hawick. You know, competition at hooker position's been brilliant for Hawick. You could have, if another player hadn't left to play Super Series, you could argue that all those hookers there could probably be from Hawick. That's not doing any disservice to Bruce Riddle because he's a versatile front row as well. They could have potentially had a lot of options there, but Fraser Rennick he's a brilliant player.
Fraser Rennick for me, he's in the top 3 players in the league for my money this season. The other of which is Ethan Riley, who is not available for this, obviously, and the other one I'll come on to shortly.
Okay, intrigue from you, but that's right across the board. Second row. Now, this is going to be interesting. There's 5 to choose from. Dalton Redpath and Sean Fairbairn from Hawick, Michael Badenhurst from Musselburgh, and Andrew Cochrane and Andrew McComb from Selkirk.
I've went Badenhurst and Redpath in the second row. Difficult to try and explain. I think you could have had another combination there with Redpath, but Badenhurst has been really good from what I've seen him. When he's been playing semi-professional rugby, obviously still getting called up to play Edinburgh. He's a really, really good rugby player, and I think would merit a place in this starting 15. So it's a huge, sizable second row, but that's the ones I'm going for.
I'm with Dale again. Dalton Redpath's one of the first names on the team sheet for me. Absolute workhorse, brings the grunt, brings the niggle, but man, he can play rugby as well. Got a bit of pace about him, even a good sevens player. But Dalton Redpath for me, one of the first names on the sheet, and I agree with Badenhurst. Musselburgh's transformation in fortunes started to happen round about his arrival. He arguably is a strong reason that they remained in the division, and I rate him as a player. I think he's a really good player, so yeah, I'm going with him.
Okay, I went for Dalton Redpath. I also went for Sean Fairbairn rather than Badenhurst. I think really because I haven't seen enough of Musselburgh playing, so and I have seen a lot of Hawick. So Sean Fairbairn for me. Incidentally, from Neil Hinnigan, he's gone with Dalton Redpath and Badenhurst. Sean Fairbairn and Redpath for Sam Matthews. Redpath and Badenhurst for Andrew Fleming, Andrew McComb and Dalton Redpath for Graham Dodds, and Sean Fairbairn and Andrew McComb for Kelly Mitchell. So again, we've got quite a split there.
Yeah, and I think that's plaudits to McComb for his performances this season. I think he's really stood up for Selkirk in a pack which contains the likes of James Head, especially in the back row. He's quite versatile, and I think Andrew McComb, if he's not starting, he would be a player I would keep in the squad because of his versatility.
Yeah,
I think he's a good player.
And that's the thing, isn't it? We're not actually mentioning any of the substitutes, but there's a lot of unnamed ones today which could sneak in there without any problem. And of course, as we've said about all 39, they can all do a job. But if we're putting a gun to our heads, we've got to come up with 15, which is a brutal thing to do, and probably we'll be reminded of that next time we go around their clubs. But we have to do it, so we are. So we come to the back row.
Speaking of brutal choices.
Absolutely. This is hard because we've got to select 3 from 8, and we're talking quality in the back row here right across the board. Angus Dunn from Gala, Liam Scott from Gala, Jay Linton, Hawick, Callum Rennick, Hawick, Stuart Graham, Hawick, Bruce McNeil, Kelso, and Paul Bogey from Musselburgh. And let's not forget Scott McClymont from Selkirk as well. There we go. Pick 3 from that. Robin.
Oh, thanks for putting me first with this one. Three of the best players in there. It's all about combinations with this one. 3 of the best. Well, it isn't because 2 number 8s for me are in there. It's as simple as that. Whether one plays 6, one plays 8. Bruce McNeil, probably the best player in the region for the last 15 years or so, and the current best club player in Scotland, Jay Linton. take your pick, 6 or 8 for them. Probably put McNeil at 6, and I'd put Linton at 8 for his out-and-out explosiveness. Angus Dunn, could argue a case, absolutely, but he plays 8, so from the 7s, I mean, Liam Scott, Callum Rennick and McClymont, how do you pick from those? I'm going to go late season form, probably because it's freshest in the memory, and in recent weeks, Callum Rennick has been absolutely outstanding. He was on another planet in that cup semi-final at Glasgow Hawks for my money, so only for that reason above the others. I mean, Stuart Graham as well, but only for that reason he comes in as my 7 with McNeil and Jay Linton.
This is the toughest, isn't it, Dale?
I always have when I was doing this, you're doing it now, and you've got a mindset of, I've got to think of the bench, and you make up in your mind the scenarios of how the game is going to go and how you don't want to drop that intensity. And I think Jay Linton is my number 8. He's also my player coach. He's my water boy. He's a bit of everything. I think he's a class rugby player. He's one of those great rugby players to watch because he's quite unorthodox. But he's really exciting. So he's a nailed on. He was my first name on the team sheet. And then my back row is made up of Liam Scott and Callum Rennick. So I've got them, and I would try, and obviously I would be looking for Callum Rennick at 6 and Liam Scott at 7. I think it's a youthful back row. It's got a lot of energy. I think you're going to be playing big city teams. Mostly. You're going to be playing obviously Edinburgh at the start. They're going to have a big pack, and you want a couple of players, a lot of players to fight on the floor, and I think you've got that throughout the whole squad. Bruce McNeil, for me, I can't disagree with Robin at all. He's in my squad because you want that experience, but you don't want that intensity to drop at all. And you could rely on him whenever. It could be in the 5th minute, it could be the 1st minute, it could be the 79th minute, but you're going to get something out of him at some point. But that's my back row, yeah.
Okay, so you're the only one who's not selected Bruce McNeil to start, which is interesting. I would put him at 6. Jay Linton is nailed on at 8, and Callum Rennick. So what else? Neil Hinnigan, he's gone for McNeil, Rennick and Linton. Sam Matthews, McNeil, Rennick and Linton. Andrew Fleming, McNeil, Scott and Linton. Graham Dodds, who knows a thing about the back row, Bruce McNeil, Scott McClymont and Jay Linton.
I was going to say about McClymont's not been mentioned enough in this conversation. It seems ridiculous. I mean, that's a guy that featured in the Offside Lines Team of the Week no less than 4 times this season. A ridiculously good player, and I feel we're doing him a disservice, to be honest. But what can you do?
But yeah. It does show the quality there. Like I know Scott McClymont is a brilliant player, and I know how hard he works for his club. I think he's another player that would absolutely excel with better players round about. I mean, that's the beauty of it. We're just guessing what a team's going to be made up of. And his form in the expert's mind, because that's not us, but his form in the expert's minds will certainly, it'll come to the fore, and they might be looking at him, especially because he's been doing it at Premiership. We're talking about perhaps Liam Scott because of I'm looking at his size, he's quite an imposing figure as well. He's been doing it in that one, and you just wonder how they're going to all survive in the training camps. So, obviously it's great to mention Scott McClymont, but the proof will be in the pudding from the experts.
Well, if it makes you feel better, Robin, there is another mention for Scott McClymont. Kelly has chosen him along with Bruce McNeil and Jay Linton. So there we are. So there are some positions clearly, number 8 particularly, Jay Linton right across the board, Sean Muir right across the board, Fraser Rennick right across the board. But certainly beyond that, there's been a lot of interesting variations, and as we've said before, every one of the 39 could do a job in the red and white shirt. So we come to the captaincy, finally. Dale.
Muir, still Muir. I think even after the teams announcing here in different selections for what everybody else has got, I think they've got a lot of players in there that could potentially be captain, depending on who starts. But Muir has led a team when he's not been the club captain. He's been a playing captain, and I think that speaks volumes of the respect from the other players and the coaching staff at a title-winning team.
And the temperament as well.
He's got good dialogue with officials when he's there. He's got a good rugby brain, which I think is important. He's got a good knowledge of the game, especially to have a prop captain. You're so far away from sometimes the rest of the action in the backs, and to have that understanding, that thread. You've got some experienced players in that back line. No matter who you select, you could, you've got somebody who can take the back leadership roles on. But yeah, as a leader, as a is a figure for the South, I think that Sean Muir ticks most of the boxes for me.
Yeah, and Robin mentioned that as well earlier on. Sean Muir captain for you. Neil Hinnigan would put Sean Muir as captain, so would Sam Matthews, so would Graham Dodds. Kelly says Sean Muir, by the way, and Andrew Fleming, the only one who would say out and out Bruce McNeill. So there we are. That concludes the voting from the Borders Rugby Radio jury. But it's not official, of course. We await for that to happen, and we will compare notes and we'll see who actually got the closest. And I'm sure there'll be one or two surprises in there, which will surprise us, no doubt. Well, we've thoroughly enjoyed doing this for the last hour and a half or so. Thanks to Robin Purdie and to Dale Clancy. Tomorrow we're at Poynter Park from 1:30 all through to the end of the Kelso Sevens tournament, and on Sunday it's a 1 o'clock start for our coverage of the Earlston Sevens. We'll also be live at the Cup Final on May the 6th from 5:30, so make a date in your diary for that. And we'll be, of course, live from Netherdale for the South versus Edinburgh, starting at 6:30 for that one, 7 o'clock kick-off on Tuesday the 9th of May. And there's finals day at Braidholme in Glasgow for the Inter-District. That's on Sunday the 21st of May, so plenty of rugby before we stop at the end of the May, and of course throw in the Jed Forest Sevens and the Selkirk Sevens as well. Hope you can join us then for that, but for now, from Dale, Robin and me, bye-bye for now.